On Christmas Eve, 1868, a church in rural Georgia locked its doors from the inside. By morning, 7 formerly enslaved men and women would be found kneeling at the altar, their throats raw, their mouths bleeding, their eyes unblinking, speaking languages no living person in that town could recognize. Not Latin, not Hebrew, not African. And when the preacher tried to stop them, they spoke his dead mother's name, a name never written down, a name he had never spoken aloud. The church was called Bethany Rest Chapel, built from warped pine and old plantation timber. Its wood still carried the smell of sweat, iron, and rot. No one remembered who consecrated it. No record survived. The bell tower leaned slightly east, as if bowing to something beneath the ground. This story does not begin with faith. It begins with fear pretending to be faith. Because what happened that night was not a miracle, and it was not possession. It was the moment something buried since slavery learned how to speak again. By 1868, the Civil War was over, but Bethany Crossing had not healed. The town sat on the edge of land once owned by the heroic estate, a plantation infamous even among its neighbors. Records show unusually low slave birth rates, high mortality, frequent disappearances. Official explanation, disease. Unofficial truth, silence. After emancipation, many freed people stayed. They had nowhere else to go. The white family stayed too, because the land was cursed with memory, and memory keeps people rooted. Bethany Rest Chapel became the town's solution. A shared church. One congregation. One Christmas service. White families sat in the front pews. Black families stood along the walls. Unity, they called it. Control, it truly was. The preacher, Reverend Elias Crow, believed deeply in order. He believed faith was structure. He believed fear could be disciplined out of people. But Crow had inherited more than a pulpit. Beneath the church lay something older than Scripture. The 7 freed congregants were not related, but they shared something far stronger than blood. They had all lived on the heroic land. They were Ruth Bell, midwife, whose hands shook when church bells rang. Isaiah Boone, mute since childhood, until that night. Martha and Caleb Reed, siblings sold apart and reunited after the war. Old Jonah Pike, whose back bore scars shaped like symbols. Elijah Moore, former grave digger for the plantation. Naomi Crow, the preacher's own half-sister, never acknowledged. They arrived early that Christmas Eve. They did not greet anyone. They did not remove their coats. And when the hymns began, they did not sing. Instead, they whispered, not to each other, but to the floor. Witnesses later claimed the wood beneath their feet vibrated, as if responding. Reverend Crow began the service with Luke's gospel. Peace, salvation, birth. But halfway through the sermon, Isaiah Boone stood up. This alone caused shock. Isaiah had never spoken. When he opened his mouth, the sound that came out was not a voice. It was layered, as if several throats were speaking through one body. The words were sharp, rhythmic, ancient. And then Ruth Bell answered him. Then Jonah. Then all 7. Not shouting, not screaming, reciting. Crow demanded silence. That is when they turned toward him. Naomi Crow spoke last. Her voice was calm. She said, you built this house over the mouths you cut open. The candles went out, and beneath the floorboards, something shifted. When the candles died, no one screamed. That detail appears again and again in survivor testimonies. No panic, no chaos, only stillness, thick, suffocating, unnatural. The 7 remained standing, mouths moving in perfect rhythm. Their speech carried a pulse, like breath traveling through soil. Those closest to them later said the sound felt inside the skull, not the ears. Reverend Crow attempted to write the words down. His journal, recovered years later, contains only broken marks, scratches, circles, reversed letters, symbols that resemble neither scripture nor known African dialects. Every attempt to transcribe the language failed. Ink bled through paper. Pencils snapped. Hands cramped violently. Crow would later write, the words resist memory. I hear them only while they are being spoken. The moment they end, my mind empties, as if scrubbed. This was not glossolalia as understood by churches. There was no emotional frenzy, no collapse, no prayerful ecstasy. This was structured, measured, deliberate, and it was responding to something beneath the church. As the 7 spoke, the floor began to change. Not visibly, but audibly. A low creaking rose from beneath the altar, not from age, but from pressure, as if weight were shifting deep below. Several white congregants later swore they smelled wet earth and iron, the scent of freshly opened ground. Jonah Pike stopped speaking briefly. He pressed his scarred palm to the floor. Then he spoke one clear sentence in English. "They are still listening." Before Crow could ask who they were, Jonah resumed the unknown language. The church bell rang once, without being pulled. That bell had not worked in years. 3 weeks after Christmas, the county sent investigators. They found nothing illegal. No violence. No bodies. But they did find the heroic plantation records, sealed and hidden inside the church wall behind the pulpit. These records had never been filed with the county. They detailed punishments not meant to be witnessed. Not executions, but ritualized silence. Tongues cut. Teeth removed. Jaws wired shut. Not for rebellion. For speaking names. For remembering. For praying in languages their owners could not understand. The plantation's final overseer had written, "They believe the ground remembers. We must make sure it does not speak." Bethany Rest Chapel had been built directly over the heroic punishment pit. Each of the 7 had been present at that pit as children. Not buried, but forced to watch. Elijah Moore, the grave digger, had been ordered to refill the earth while people were still alive beneath it. His testimony, recorded decades later, stated, "They weren't screaming. They were reciting. Over and over. Like they were teaching the dirt something. That dirt was never moved again. Instead, the church was raised on top of it. Faith over memory. Hymns over testimony. Wood and prayer over bone." Investigators asked why the event happened on Christmas Eve. Ruth Bell answered simply, "Because birth is when the door is open." Christmas was the only night of the year when the church allowed extended service after dark. When doors were sealed to keep warmth inside. When songs masked whispers. The 7 had prepared for months. They had fasted. They had memorized, not words, but rhythms. They had walked the perimeter of the church barefoot at dawn. Not summoning. Listening. Near midnight, as the language intensified, something happened that no official report explains. The altar cracked. A hairline fracture ran through the wood, leaking damp soil. The temperature dropped sharply. Breath became visible. Naomi Crow stepped forward. She spoke directly into the fracture. This time, witnesses remembered the words clearly. "We kept you quiet long enough." The ground answered, not with sound, but with movement. And that was when Reverend Crow realized the service had never been meant for God. It was meant for the dead who were denied speech. Reverend Elias Crow did not dismiss the congregation that night. He couldn't. The 7 were still speaking. Not louder, not faster, but deeper. The sound no longer seemed to come from their throats alone. It echoed from the floor, the walls, even the pews themselves, as if the building had learned the rhythm and was repeating it back. Crow tried to pray. No words came. His mouth opened, but nothing formed. His tongue felt heavy, swollen, unfamiliar, like an object placed in his mouth without permission. For the first time in his ministry, the man whose authority rested entirely on speech was voiceless. The congregation waited. Minutes passed. Then Naomi Crow turned toward him, not with anger, but with something far worse. Expectation. Modern scholars would later speculate about mass hysteria, trauma response, or religious trance. But those explanations collapse under one detail. The language was changing the behavior of the listeners. People began to remember things they had not thought about in decades. A woman recalled a cellar she was never supposed to enter. A man smelled iron and realized it came from his own childhood hands. Another remembered a song his grandmother sang only once, before being punished for it. The language was not telling a story. It was unlocking memory. Crow wrote later. It rearranged thought, not by force, but by permission. The 7 were not possessed. They were conduits. At 12:17 a.m., town elders forced the church doors open. Cold air rushed in. The language stopped instantly. Silence fell so hard it felt physical. 7 pairs of eyes turned toward the elders. Not threatening, not pleading, waiting. One elder ordered them to leave. Jonah Pike stepped forward and said, in clear English, "If we stop now, it will finish without us." No one understood what he meant. They would soon. The elders tried to remove the 7 by force. They could not. Hands slipped. Grips failed. One man fainted without explanation. Then, without warning, the language resumed, but it had changed. It was slower, lower, more deliberate. And now, the church itself responded. Cracks formed along the foundation. Dust fell from the rafters. The bell rang again, twice this time. Someone screamed that the floor was breathing. Because it was. The ground beneath the church did not collapse. It opened. Not wide enough to swallow anyone. Just enough to reveal what had always been there. Bones. Dozens. Arranged. Not in graves, but in patterns. Circles. Lines. Spirals. And at the center of those patterns, stones carved with the same symbols Crow had failed to write. This was not a burial site. It was a record. A language written in remains because mouths had been destroyed. Naomi was the first to stop speaking. She looked at her brother, really looked at him, and said, "You were never meant to lead them. You were meant to guard us." She confessed then. Their shared father had ordered the pit created, ordered the punishments, ordered the silence. And when emancipation came, Elias Crow had helped choose the church location, believing, sincerely, that faith would cover what the ground remembered. Naomi had waited years for this night. She had learned the rhythm as a child, tapping it into the dirt when no one was watching. The ground had answered her back. The 7 stopped speaking entirely. They knelt. The congregation waited. The ground waited. Reverend Elias Crow stepped away from the pulpit. That single act mattered. Because for decades, the pulpit had only carried one kind of voice. The voice that chose what could be spoken and what must remain buried. When Crow moved aside, something else took its place. Not a person. A weight. Those inside the church later said it felt as if pressure settled across their shoulders, as though unseen hands were resting there, neither violent nor gentle. Expectant. And then people began to speak. Not the 7. Everyone else. A man confessed he had helped fill the pit as a boy. A woman admitted she washed blood from in books. An elder wept and spoke the names he had been ordered never to record. These were not emotional outbursts. They were precise, measured. The language had prepared them. Memory, once unlocked, refused to return to silence. As the confessions continued, the church responded. The bell rang again, this time softly, repeatedly, as if marking time. Cracks widened, not violently, but deliberately. The floor did not collapse. It yielded, enough for the congregation to see the full design beneath them. The bones were arranged like a script, each body positioned in relation to another, forming sequences, pauses, repetitions. This was not random cruelty. It was a system, a method of storing testimony when speech was forbidden. One scholar would later write, "The church was not haunted. It was outnumbered." When the confessions slowed, the 7 rose. Their work was nearly finished, but it had a cost. Their voices were failing. Blood returned to their mouths. Their hands trembled uncontrollably. Their eyes no longer focused on the living. Ruth Bell collapsed first, then Isaiah Boone, who whispered his final English words. We remembered for them. They had not been chosen because they were strong. They were chosen because they had survived. And survival, in this place, had always meant carrying what others refused to hold. County officials arrived before dawn. They wanted the church sealed. The bones reburied. The incident classified as hysteria. Reverend Crow refused. For the first time, he disobeyed the system that created him. He ordered the church closed permanently, not in denial, but in recognition. Bethany Rest Chapel would never hold another service. No hymns, no sermons, no silence disguised as peace. 3 of the 7 died within a year. Not violently, quietly, as if something had finally released them. The remaining 4 lost their ability to speak altogether. Doctors found no physical cause, but they did not seem distressed. Witnesses said they smiled when standing barefoot on soil, as if listening. Bethany Crossing never recovered. Families moved away. Children refused to enter the old church. The bell was removed, but it continued to ring during heavy rain. Records of the incident were scattered, mislabeled, or destroyed. But the ground remained, waiting. Decades later, historians searching county archives noticed a pattern. Birth records missing surnames. Death certificates marked unrecoverable. Land deeds that abruptly changed ownership without explanation. All tied to the heroic land. The church had not caused the event. It had revealed it. The 7 had not summoned anything. They had translated. Linguists reviewing Crow's fragmented notes reached a disturbing conclusion. The symbols were not phonetic. They were positional, meaning depended on where the speaker stood, on what lay beneath them. It was a language designed to be spoken only in the presence of the dead. Remove it from that context, and it disappears. Just like memory. Crow resigned shortly after. His last journal entry reads, "I mistook silence for peace. I mistook order for righteousness. The ground was patient. We were not." He never preached again. He was buried far from Bethany Crossing. And yet, his grave reportedly sinks slightly deeper every year. Church authorities refused to classify the event as divine. Too structured, too accusatory, too specific. Miracles uplift. This exposed. So the story faded, or was pushed, or learned how to hide. The seven never asked for recognition. They asked for acknowledgement. Because buried memory does not rot. It waits. And when given rhythm, voice, permission, it speaks. Not in rage, but in truth. If this story unsettles you, it should. Because Bethany Rest Chapel was not unique. There are places like it everywhere. Churches, schools, orphanages, institutions built to cover what was never resolved. The ground beneath them still remembers. And sometimes, on nights meant for peace, it finds a voice.